So the learning objectives today is to understand the fundamentals of estimating, to orient you to the estimate components. We're going to talk about the 5 levels and 10 steps of estimating that we go through, and an introduction to the analysis of estimates and construction costs. So costs are always an issue, but it's my experience that it's often not the primary issue. And if we can get the costs out of the way, if we can not have that be the primary impediment to what we're doing, which is often the case when we're doing, whether we're doing a construction project or we're doing litigation. Cost estimating and budgeting and numbers make some people's eyes roll back in their head. So, and most people, they either don't recognize that their eyes are rolled back in their head, or they, I think, as a natural defense mechanism, want to, they end up biting and scratching around issues that are different. And estimating, if you know how to do it, if you know where the numbers come from, it just means you can focus on other issues. They become a non-issue in some cases. So to figure out costs, we need to identify the steps between where we are and where we want to be. Because really, let's be realistic. Building construction is really, it's quite simple. This is not, we're not building microchips, we're not making iPhones, we're stacking sticks and stones very neatly. Okay, just don't, construction people, it's a big deal. You got to be, there's nuance, it's a lot to put a building together, but really it's just sticks and stones stacked neatly. You don't need to be a rocket scientist. And so figuring out the cost to building, to stacking these sticks and stones neatly is not, again, it's not an exercise in rocket science, but there are so many moving parts that, and no matter how smart you are, if you don't have any experience in it, it can be overwhelming at first. It can be like trying to get a drink from the fire hose. So, so this is what we're going to talk about. So this is the heart of solving building problems, and like the issues list, we can usually identify 5 to 15 key steps that'll move the situation to conclusion. So estimating versus pricing, this is a very important dynamic here. So estimating is really figuring out the cost that's going to the cost to perform the work. What's the labor cost? What are the materials costs? What do equipment costs? We got to do detailed quantity takeoff if we want to do a really precise estimate. We need to know exactly how many square feet or cubic yards or square yards there are in this, and are there access issues? These things can cost money. But pricing has to do with things like competition and market conditions and contractor availability and personal relationships. And let me pause here and just say, so if personal relationships, if you're the owner and you have a personal relationship with a contractor, that tends to make the prices of the construction go down. Generally, not always, but generally, a personal relationship between the contractor and the owner tends to make prices go down. But it's very different if the personal relationship is with the owner's representative or the owner's agent. And personal relationships with owner's agents or owner's representatives tends to make prices go up. Okay, so it's not uncommon for the agents to be wined and dined very elaborately, and that's some of this is perfectly fine. And as long as the relationship is arm's length, and as long as you take the appropriate steps to make sure that the pricing is correct, then that's great. But I would be careful. Even if you're the owner, be careful about just taking figures from people who you have personal relationships with, because competition is the only way that we know to reliably lower cost and improve quality. I'm going to say that again, because this is, in construction, the difference between, I'm going to talk to you about estimating, but when you're budgeting, you got to, that a budget is what you're actually going to pay, because sometimes there's a big difference between the estimate and the price, right? So if market conditions are hot, and there's a lot of construction going on, prices are going up, right? Labor costs are going up, material costs are going up, equipment costs are going up. That's just part of the program. So, like I said, competition is the only way that we know in virtually any form of human endeavor to increase the quality and lower the cost at the same time. Now, you have to be professional about it to do that, to get that right, but That's part of the program. So the purpose for estimating: budgets, feasibility, project control, project management. Every project, even Bill Gates, should have a budget on his construction projects, even though he can afford it. It's a control mechanism. So for bids or proposals or insurance claims or litigation, these are lots of reasons for estimating and budgeting. So, so what we want to do is build the project on paper before we do it in the real world. So we might have an idea or feasibility study, or once we do the design and we have a scope and drawings and cost and schedule, all of these things impact the project, and we need to go through this when we're building on paper before we do so in the real world. And I can tell you that the biggest and the best construction companies in the world are the best at construction cost estimating, because they literally build that project, including the scope and the budget and the schedule, before they get out into the field. And then when they're in the field, the whole time they are comparing their actual performance to that plan. The estimating process is the planning process. And that's they are the best because they exercise the discipline to first make an amazing and detailed plan, and then to compare their performance to that plan, and they learn from it continually. So, so again, the scope, the method, and the cost. So the scope, so if I'm just going to build a wall, it's a profoundly different wall if I have 10 feet of wall versus 10,000 feet of wall. Right? So that's the scope. What's the scope? I'm going to build a 6-foot tall wall that's 10 feet long, or I'm going to build a 16-foot wall that's 10,000 feet long. Right? I mean that's a scope issue. And the method is am I going to build a 6-foot tall, 10-foot long concrete masonry unit wall, or am I going to build a 9-foot tall chain link fence that has barbed wire at the top that's 700 miles long along the border? Right? That's the method. The method, how are we going to do it? The question is, so I'm sitting in a conference room now that has carpet on the floor and drywall walls with a knockdown finish and paint on the walls and a T-bar ceiling. So, but so the method. Now, if I had vinyl tile in this room, that would be a different method for installing the tile. And so if I had a tile floor in a residence, the way they usually get installed, if you just call a contractor, they come and slap tile down. Well, that's different than if I want a high-end, high-performance floor, like we might put in a mansion, or we might put in a shopping mall where we have a decoupling membrane and we have strict adherence to all of the highest standards in the land. So those are different methods of installation, right? So we have the scope, we have the method, and then we have the costs. So the costs. Once you have the scope and the method down, the costs from contractor to contractor should vary only slightly. They should vary only slightly, but your prices are going to vary dramatically. It used to be, I was a certified professional estimator for more than a decade, and we used to talk about prices that would come in between 2 and 5% was the variation between high and low. The last public bid I did, it's been a while, but it was for a relatively small building, and I think the low bid was $900,000 and the high bid was like $2.2 million, which is absolutely crazy and unheard of. And in private work, where the scope of work is defined even less, the variation can be even more. So you got to be careful and have a mechanism for comparing. And the question here, what this matrix shows is, who's doing the defining? Is the architect and the owner, are they defining what's happening? Are they setting the scope? Or is it a construction defect case where you have trade experts and a lead expert who's defining the scope of the work? Or is it a remodeling project, a home, where the owner and the general contractor are defining the scope of the work? And the method, the general contractor is deciding how everything goes. But if you're doing new construction on a school, well, you've got architects and engineers, and the general contractor might make some of those decisions, and then the costs are from the general contractor, the cost estimator. So tools of the trade, the old-fashioned ways, pencils and paper and colored pens and architectural drawings on paper. Nowadays, lots of this stuff is in the computer, and we do on-screen quantity takeoffs. Do we have crew rates and historical cost data, forms and checklists, bid documents, etc. Calculators or computer. I could go on and on about this, but we're talking at a high level. And the skills that an estimator needs, they need to be able to read plans and to understand the methods of construction. I'll show you a manual that I love for you. Even a skilled construction cost estimator can do a good estimate on work that he has never even seen performed using some of these tools that we'll show you. So construction math, computer spreadsheets, you need to be good at computer spreadsheets because that's where a big estimate comes together. So we have the estimating basics. When we do this, we have 5 levels of estimating, and there are 10 steps that go on. So I'm going to show you this in a graphic form right now. So in the backup materials, you don't even try to read this, okay? So this is level, you're going to see this come up. So there are 10 steps that you go through, and you're going to go through those 10 steps 5 times before you get to the conclusion of a really detailed construction cost estimate. So at level 1, we're going to take these steps. So we're going to format and outline the scope and figure out how much time we think it's going to take, and estimate the materials and the equipment and the subcontractors, and what are the general conditions. General conditions are what, are we going to have a porta potty on site for everybody to use? Are we going to have a construction site trailer? Those are general conditions. How much overhead are we going to have? What kind of home office overhead? How much profit do we expect to have? And what are the non-construction costs associated with getting this project done? Those things like architecture, and those things like what else is there? Moving people out. Do we have to move people out, or are there other things like that? So at level 1, we go through all 10 steps at level 1. Then we do level 2, and we do all 10 steps again. And then we do level 3, and we do all 10 steps again. Same with level 4 and 5. Okay? So we're going to go through that checklist. The order of magnitude, level 1. All right, here we are. And I'm already late. So we're going to do a little case study. Otto's Outhouse. You guys, those of you who've seen a bunch of these programs, you've seen Otto's Outhouse many times. And I'm going to show you a couple of order of magnitude estimates that we really did. Let's see. So here we are. We're going to build Otto's Outhouse, right? We're going to estimate Otto's Outhouse. So level 1, we're just going to walk through these steps, outlining the scope and the budget, the scope and the schedule and the labor and the materials. So here's, we're going to create a summary. We're only going to use a summary sheet. This is going to be 1-page level 1 estimate. The scope of level 1 work breakdown structure, it's just 1 paragraph to 1 page. There's some basic quantities, no real quantity takeoff. These are approximate figures. We're trying to get an order of magnitude so people can start making decisions about whether they want to move forward or not. So, there's little or no breakdown of time and labor in this step, but sometimes if you're really unsure about any particular big number, you can drill down into it, and sometimes. So, if I go back to this, you can see, you might be able to see on the screen, it says 1 to 4 hours to do a level 1 estimate. All right, so if there's one number that's big and you're not sure about it, it's a peculiar assembly, we might make some calls. We might scratch out some calculations, but many of the numbers, we're just going to punch them in we're going to apply our judgment and our professionalism and our 20 or 30 or 40 years in experience in the construction business. So, so the material, we're going to do a guesstimate. There's very little quantity takeoff, detailed quantity takeoff. We're going to do quantities only, no cost of materials. We're not going to call the Home Depot and ask them how much a tube of sealant is in Valencia, right? We're just going to talk about those assemblies cost $1 a square foot, or $2 a square foot, or $20 a square foot. Hopefully that makes sense. And then equipment, this is just a WAG. So a guesstimate. I think guesstimate is a cross between a guess and an estimate, and a WAG is a wild-ass guess, and a SWAG is a scientific wild-ass guess. So if you do a little calculation, a SWAG is a scientific wild-ass guess. But when you're a professional, a construction professional, you usually get pretty close, even when you're doing a WAG, right? So subcontractors' unit prices. This is we use only the big numbers for when we use estimating manual references like suites or means. So then general conditions are just a percentage of overhead, usually about 8%. It goes up and down a little bit, but overhead percentage, again, this is somewhere between 5 and 15%. Profit is somewhere between 5 and 15%, and non-construction costs. We just got to think about, are we going to have engineers and third-party inspection, and are we going to have to move people out? Are we going to have to do, what are the other costs associated with getting this project done? All right, so here's our Otto's outhouse. I showed you the picture before. So grading and excavation for $1,000, framing for $1,000, roofing for $500, final cleanup for $500. So the total's $3,000, profit and overhead for $1,000, total construction costs $400, and other project costs. So $4,500 for our project. It's just that's our level 1 order magnitude estimate. There it is, boom. Okay. Here's another example. Multifamily residential. So this was a real project that we worked on, and this one was in litigation. And at the time I got the project, they sent me a bunch of documents, and they said, please review the documents and tell us what you think you would do. Spend 4 hours, so I did that. But I also added on, I said, I spent another hour doing a rough estimate of what I think you're going to spend in the end. And so I just, and I knew that the buildings, they were in rough condition on the exteriors. So I thought, if we were to just reclad this whole project, I needed to know, So the recladding, so I just took measurements. This is the building. So the front, the back, the left, the right. So I took the measurements. I literally did this from Google Earth. You can use a measuring device on Google Earth. So I used an aerial image, and I figured out that this building type was this size, and there was, I think that's 2,840 square feet of siding on that building, and the siding was going to range from $3 to $6 a foot, and paint was going to be 50 cents to $1, and so it was somewhere between 10 and 20 grand to side that building, depending on the details. And this building type, building 2, it was going to be somewhere between 12 and 24,000, right? So, and then there was building types 3 and 4, and then so there were 4 building types, and so I took the highest numbers and I multiplied them by the number of buildings. So there was 2 building type 1s, 12 building type 2s, 3 building type 3s. So I added it all up, and the total was 550 grand, say. And we shouldn't even talk in numbers. I should never even say 547,960, right? Because this is order of magnitude. So you shouldn't even say those numbers. That's 550 grand, 500 grand, 500 to 600 grand, whatever you say. And then and then I threw in another 1,000 to 3,000 bucks per unit for another 140 grand. So I added 20% because I had overestimated these. So instead of putting usually an estimate's going to have in burden, a burden is the cost over the hard cost, and the hard cost, that's guys with hammers and saws and the materials that they install. That's what I call hard cost. Some people put more than that in it. But then, so usually the burden is somewhere between 30 and 50%. That's a rough number. But I just threw 20 on this because I had fattened these numbers so much. So the cost range, so the maximum I got up to there was 127,000 bucks. But I didn't think it was going to cost that much. So I said, I think that, in the end, my number is going to come out somewhere between 400 and 800,000 bucks. That's what I told them. All right, and you're going to see later on that I was right. So I did this before I even got hired, and in the end, I had a very detailed construction cost estimate that came into that range. So here's a commercial case study, and this is a hotel on the Oregon coast, and so those of you who live and work in temperate Southern California, buildings on the Oregon coast have a harder life than ships in the Caribbean Sea. Absolutely brutal. So this one, we were going to reclad the exterior, and we actually did this. This is a one-page, this was the whole estimate. We usually don't do order of magnitude estimates on one page because they're a little bit dangerous, right? It's like a chainsaw. You can do a lot of work with a chainsaw, but you can also cut off your foot. So if you're, so we spent whatever an hour, and this ended up on letterhead, but they usually don't. And maybe on this one we spent 2 hours. But I don't know. We had 400 grand. In the end, it was literally like 405,000 bucks on this estimate. But we, for our scope of work, we were completely recladding the front elevation and just redoing the trim and repainting the whole place. So, so the question is, so we don't have time to do this. We used to do this program as a 2-hour program, and we'd have you print out the estimate sheets, and we'd break down. But we usually like to outline our estimates using Uniformat. This is it's a way to organize building elements. So foundations, any substructure issues, A, and then you break it down to we usually work at level 3 for building elements. But then in the shell, so the shell is the exterior cladding and the windows and the roof, and the interiors are stairs and finishes and walls and floors and ceiling finishes. And then services like conveying as elevators or escalators, plumbing, HVAC, fire protection, electrical, that's the services. And then furnishings and equipment, which sometimes we include and sometimes we don't. Sometimes we just got to move people's furnishings out of the way. But and then finally, special construction, things like firewalls and other special construction and demolition. So that's how. Oops. All right, this isn't cooperating with me. There we go. Okay, there we go. So that's the way we would outline an estimate if there's not already some more natural way to do it. I'll show you later. You can organize estimates in many different ways, and people often do, which the fact of people organizing their estimates all in different ways, the fact that there's not one industry standard means that it's hard to compare estimates, right? So that makes the estimate comparison hard. So if you're the owner or you're the owner's representative, if you start out with an estimate format, if you can then require anybody who wants to bid on that project to deliver their numbers in that same format so that you can do comparison. It's very powerful to do so, and I highly recommend it. All right, I got to hurry because I'm feeding you from the fire hose. All right, you know what? Let me take a breath here. Has anyone asked a question? Did I tell you? I should have a little slide that reminds me that that everybody can ask questions. And someone did say good morning to me, and I think I know who it was, but I can't read it yet. Hold on. Give me a second here. My little mouse is struggling. All right. So thank you. All right. Ready? So you guys can ask questions. Questions are good. If we were doing this in person, we would surely not get to the end, and that would be a good thing. We would have a lot of conversation about what's happening, okay? So conversation is good. So if you got any questions, that's a good thing, and I'd love to hear them. All right, so putting it all together. So the 10-step summary, 5 levels, 10 steps. Decide on the level of detail you're going to need. We talked about this, about organizing the estimate, making a sensible list, and I talk about this in almost every program I do. Making a sensible list it's oftentimes the hardest thing you do, but it makes your life so much easier the rest of the time, and it's something that that most people struggle with. That was a funny question. Sorry. Estimate, setup, relating the parts, resources. Okay, so here we are. So we're going to format the estimate, outline the scope, and sometimes detail the scope. What exactly is happening? So at first you might say, we're going to remove and replace the roof and remove and replace the siding windows. Okay, so that's the scope. But then when you get down at level 5, it is literally what are the exact steps. We're going to show up in the morning, and we're going to have this piece of equipment piece by John Deere model XYZ123 on site, and we're going to use that. And so you literally break it down step by step. And we're going to have a 5-man crew doing demolition for 8 hours, and then the next day we're going to do this. That's the level of detail. We might break out the scope. So then there's the time, the labor, and materials that we're using. What equipment are we using? What subcontractors are we using? And ultimately, if we want to know what we some people think that there's really like some black box that you can't understand where these numbers come from. Well, if I'm hiring a subcontractor and I get numbers that I think are wacky, I literally sit down and estimate what I think they're going to cost, and I begin negotiating with them and say, what are you talking about? And it's the same thing when we get a change order. If you're not a construction professional, you can't do this, and you get a change order from a contractor, all you can say is, okay. Well, I assure you, when I'm an owner's representative, Most of the projects I've ever worked on as an owner's representative, I have saved the owner far in excess of my total cost just in managing the cost of change orders. You know, I want to pay, you know, it's not my money. I think the contractor should be paid what's fair. But oh my God, just in the cost of change orders. So this is very important in being able to figure out construction cost estimating is just as important for change orders as it is for any of this stuff. Okay, and then there's general conditions, overhead costs, profit, and non-construction costs. Okay, so again, we talked about this level 5 estimating, and as you go through here, again, I'm not going to go detail by detail, but the estimate gets more and more refined. In the same way that if you got a swimming pool in your backyard and you don't want a swimming pool anymore, you want a putting green, you're going to have to fill up that swimming pool. And you wouldn't just fill the whole thing with dirt and then roll a compactor over it, because the dirt at the bottom wouldn't be compacted. You do this, you usually do, you fill a hole in 6-inch lifts or 12-inch lifts. So you do 100% of the area, you cover it all in 6 or 12 inches of dirt, then you compact it. Then you put another 6 to 12 inches of dirt, then you compact it. So we're going to do this, this is doing estimating in multiple lifts. And so it's increasing levels of detail. So at the end of level 1, you have an order of magnitude. You have an idea what the estimate's going to cost. You always sort of know what the estimate's going to cost. All right, so what level of detail do we need? How much specificity? Oftentimes we only need an order of magnitude or conceptual estimate in order to know whether we're in the ballpark, whether this estimate needs to get at a deeper level. If your first order magnitude estimate, if you're going to do a kitchen remodel and you say, well, I want this and that and this and this and that, and the contractor says, all right, well, that's going to be about $180,000. You go, oh, wow, I was thinking more like spending $40,000. Okay, well, that's different. So that's the idea of doing an order of magnitude or conceptual estimate, and lots of time has been wasted by people doing detailed estimates when an order of magnitude or conceptual estimate would have sufficed to say, oh wow, that's a no-go. Don't spend any more time on that. All right, so you got to be very careful about doing detailed or bid level estimates for projects that are never going to happen, because when somebody gets the numbers, they fall out of their chair, right? By the way, the same thing goes for budgeting and estimating professional services costs for lawyers or construction consultants. It's oftentimes the first conversation I have with somebody when they call me about a project, and I tell them, well, what you're talking about is probably a $18,000 project, somewhere between $15,000 and $20,000 project. You go, whoa! So then you just that's it. It stops the conversation, or they say, oh wow, that's cheaper than I thought. Last time I hired so and so, and they charged me $60,000 for that. Because by the way, things have with technology, things have gotten cheaper they should have gotten cheaper for everybody. They sure have for us. What we used to do for $100,000, we now do for under sometimes 25. All right, sensible list. Why this matters. Let's see. So estimates happen either room by room. You might use the SB 800 list if you're in California. That's the builder's right to repair law. By who did the work. So the Construction Specifications Institute, the master format, that's generally by most construction. If you're sitting in a big building right now, your project probably had a set of plans and a specifications manual, and the specifications manual was probably ordered by the Construction Specifications Institute master format. We prefer Uniformat, which is by the construction assembly. So in master format, if there's plastering in the shower and there's plastering on the outside of the building, those two sections are very near one another, right? Because that's sort of by who does it. And if you're using Uniformat, then the windows and the exterior cladding, like stucco or plaster, are very near each other. But the plaster in the shower is in a completely different section because it's by construction assembly, and the top-level summary is substructure, superstructure, exterior cladding, then interiors, right? So the shower is going to be in the interior section in Uniformat, regardless of what it's made of, whether it's a plastic shower pan, or whether it's you know, a mud set tile. It's all going to be inside. You know, and in the construction specifications codes, any tile is all going to be clumped together in the same section. So a tile on the outside of the building is going to be in the same section as the tile in the shower, but not in Uniformat. So each has its benefits or its weaknesses. So, but all of this is a work breakdown structure. So I've talked about this a bunch, and I don't have time to go into it in this, but just so you know, I'm a lunatic about conforming with the rules of a work breakdown structure, and I'm not going to change my ways. So consider outlining, organizing, using. I would use Uniformat. And then you put it on in, here's a way, I'm not going to go through this step by step, but this is literally our internal process for setting up an estimate. And so we, you know, print this out and check, 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 check. So, and here's it goes. So there's a project cover sheet, or excuse me, this is not cover sheet, this is the summary sheet. On top of all this, we will put a cover sheet that says what the estimate is and who did it and when it was done. But the summary sheet pulls everything together, as you can see from all these little lines. So the two primary sheets are this estimate summary, which is either 1 or 2 pages long typically. It shouldn't be more than 3 pages long, even in the, I don't care if it's a billion-dollar project, it shouldn't be more than 3 pages long. You should try really hard to keep it to 1 or 2. And then there's the estimate details, which could be very, very long, because each line item on this estimate summary is going to be broken down into tremendous detail in the estimate summary sheet, if it's a detailed estimate. But also in this estimate summary sheet is where all these other things are going to come from. So we've got a general conditions sheet down here that goes onto the summary page. Here we've got you know, a relocation page. So if you're going to relocate somebody, it goes onto the summary page. But everything else, you know, all of the labor rates and the quantity takeoff and the calls that you make to subcontractors or to material suppliers, that all gets connected to the estimate details. So all the way down to from, you know, this estimate is for $127 million is going to be on the summary page. And the reasons for that, you know, each boom, 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 you got all this, these details. Well, and the reason for that, part of the reason for that is that the windows are going to cost, you know, the material and installation for the windows is going to cost $9 million. And the reason, and so that would be on the, you know, on the summary page, you'd have a windows section. And then you would go into the details, and under here you would have windows, and you would have the, you know, the materials. And okay, where are we getting those materials? Well, we called 3 different material suppliers, and they all give us relatively similar number figures for the specified windows. And you know, it's going to take, you know, an hour, you know, a man hour, you know, 3 man hours per window to install, and we're going to use, you know, the Sonneborn sealant that costs $7 a tube if you buy it in bulk. And, you know, to get it to the site, it's going to cost this much. So all of these details can be included on the estimate details page. But those estimate details then get summarized on the estimate summary. Okay? And, you know, and so, you know, if we got 3 man hours a window, how much does a man hour cost? Oh, well, our assumption is that we're going to have a supervisor, you know, we're going to have a foreman and a laborer and a journeyman carpenter. And, you know, so that's our crew. And, you know, that all 3 of those guys put together cost whatever, $160 an hour, and et cetera, et cetera. That's where that goes. Okay, so these are the estimate components that I just went through with you. And so our resources, so, you know, we sometimes use, we can validate our data using cost data like from RS Means. They have very technical books sometimes for mechanical. I love, love, love the Walker's Building Estimators Reference. I just became a LinkedIn contact with the president of this company. They've been publishing this thing for 100 years or something. And if you don't know how to do a particular assembly, this book will tell you. It's like 2 inches thick and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages long. And you can learn more about construction by reading this book than most others in the construction business. And then there's also the American Society for Professional Estimators has a standard estimating practice. And this is, you know, essentially, you know, the gold standard for how to put together a construction cost estimate. So, all right. It is now 10:40. We have 20 minutes left, and I think we've done a good job of getting to where we are now. I'm going to take a drink of my coffee. Remember to type in a question if you got it. Level 4, conceptual and preliminary estimate. So levels 2 and 3. Okay. So now we're getting into the details of what I've been talking about in adding labor. You know, who's going to do it and how long are they going to take and what are they installing and how do we know how much that stuff costs? You know, how do we know what it is that goes into the process? So if you don't know what goes into the process, in most of the cases you can just look in the Walker's Manual, or you can find this out. It's not rocket science. And much of the work that we would estimate in a construction claim or in a construction defect case, you literally can't take it out of a book. So so it's like, okay, well, this is a peculiar assembly that we've never seen. You know, if you have an estimating program like Xactimate, that's a pricing program, I would argue. But you can see, okay, well, there's flooring and there's wall covers and wall finishes and painting and base and case, and you can break it down that way. And and the question is, who's going to do it and how long are they going to take, and how much do they cost to have on site, and then what is the what's a reasonable amount of overhead and profit, etc. So let's see, construction cost flow chart. We just went through that construction cost flow chart, by the way, using the estimate components, estimating details. I showed you all of this. Quantity takeoff is when you literally sit with a set of plans, or you're out on a site and you're measuring things and figuring out what are the quantities. So I'm sitting in like I said, I was sitting in a conference room, and it's about 20 feet wide by 12 feet deep, and the ceiling's at about 8 feet high, and I got a wall of windows on one side, and I've got a wall of bookshelves. So I got a wall of windows that's about 10 or 12 feet wide, and I got bookshelves that are about 18 feet across and 7 feet high. So all of these things that I'm naming to you, I would literally just make a list of these. And if you're doing this in an estimating program, or you're using a standard format like master format or master spec or Uniformat, you would have every room you went into to do this, to identify these quantities, you would list them in the same order. All right? So again, back to our 5 levels, 10 steps. We're doing level 2. So we're going level 2 and 3. So we're going to move on to the estimate details sheets. On level 1, we just had the 1-page summary, as we talked about. So now we're moving on to the details, and we're taking each one of the line items on the summary sheet, and we're putting it into the estimate details sheet, and we are making room to do some detailed estimating. So we essentially we're just these are the detailed steps for setting up a detailed estimate in Microsoft Excel or some other spreadsheet program. So the scope of work, we're going to add details with 2 to 10 categories each. So on the estimate summary page, we might have had windows, and we might have said, I don't know, windows on this project are going to cost $100,000. But now at level 2 and 3, we're going to break that down. We're going to say, okay, wait a minute. So let's see. Hold on. On the front elevation, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 windows and a front door and a garage door. And a 2-car garage door. And on the right elevation, I got 6 windows. That are all on average 4 by 4, whatever. We're starting to break it down. What's it going to cost for material, and what's it going to cost for the installation of those windows? And so we're breaking it down at a greater level. So at the end of this, we might go, wow, what, I was a little bit off. I think we're only going to be at $75,000 for these windows, and that's the refinement process. Hopefully that makes sense how I said this. So at level 1, we're just saying, oh, well, crap, we got a custom home with nice wood, vinyl-clad wood windows, or aluminum-clad wood windows. I bet we're going to pay windows and doors. I bet we're going to pay $100,000 for those. Boom. And, for material and installation. And so at level 2, we're breaking that down to, okay, on the front elevation, we got this many. On the right elevation, on the back elevation, oh, wow, hold on. On the back elevation, we've got 4 sets of 9-foot-tall double French doors. Yeah, those are going to be, wow, that's when we start breaking down. And because you might say, uh-oh, we didn't estimate enough. I bet these windows are going to cost $125,000. So then we just go through the estimate, literally all those 10 steps again, at a greater level of detail. So the format goes from a one-page to now we've got the estimate details, we've got the cost of labor, we've got materials calls we're going to start making for the biggest items. Okay, so and in conformance with the work breakdown structure, we're hopefully going to have somewhere between 5 and, in a really detailed construction cost estimate, though, a top-level summary should have somewhere between 5 and 40 line items. Probably better to have between 5 and 25. A work breakdown structure typically is going to have at most 9 or 10 level 1 items. But in a construction cost estimate, because you're dealing with professionals who deal with estimates over and over again, you might have as many as 50 line items. So in the summary. And then for each level below that, you're going to have between 2 and 15 items at level 2 on the details page. So so instead of $100,000 for the windows, you've got, okay, so it's going to cost me, $40,000 to get these things installed, and the material itself is going to cost me, 70 grand, and the, so the windows, and then I've got flashing materials, and I've got nails and screws, and I've got all of the equipment that I'm required to do this. I'm going to need nail guns, and I'm going to need screw guns, and I'm going to need other protective materials, etc. So what do I need? I need sealant. So this is, we're just going through, what's the scope? Are we, we're refining that. How many square feet? How many lineal feet is it going to be? So what are we going to do? Labor. We're going to use the typical crews. We're going to slightly overestimate. We're not going to make any phone calls about what it takes. Materials, same thing. I'm just going to go through the list here. So, all right. And this at level 3. Here's another checklist. So conform with the work breakdown structure rules in the main category, et cetera. We're just now, we're taking, so for example, for the equipment, we're making phone calls and we're using the books that we have and we're documenting that. We're creating an estimate backup file. And, when we talk about contractors, we're making some phone calls. We're not being, it's only for the biggest, most expensive numbers, the most unknown numbers, okay? All right, so construction cost flow charts. So we have labor, materials and equipment, and subs that are all, this is the hard cost, right? This is what I call hard cost, a direct hard cost. And then we've got field supervision and overhead. That's the overhead. Excuse me, the field supervision and overhead is what we call general conditions. These are general conditions. Then we've got office supervision and overhead. That is overhead. So, so these costs technically are still direct costs of construction. These are, you're in the field, you got guys in the field. You might only have a supervisor or a superintendent on a small project half the time. So then you literally bill them half the time. All right? And then there's the office supervision and overhead. Then you've got profit, and then you've got total construction costs. But total construction costs might not be enough for us in this scenario. We might need total project costs because owners care about total project costs. So you got designers, architects, engineers, specialty experts, owners' representatives and property managers, construction managers, testing, relocation, and other expenses. That's how you get to total project cost, okay? All right. So, again, using the estimate components, we've talked about this a lot. And so this is a detailed estimate sheet. So in your backup materials, there's examples of these estates. And we don't have time today, and most of your eyes would roll back in your head anyway, about the excruciating detail that we go into. Do you really want to know that I know exactly how much the tube of sealant is going to cost that I'm going to use to remove and reinstall that window? I mean, and that's the, if we do an estimate at that level, that's what we, if it's at the final level, and I've literally testified, I had an attorney once in a trial slam an estimating book down and say, are you telling me that making a call to Home Depot is better than the numbers in this book? And I almost didn't know what to say. And I said, yes, it's infinitely better, my estimate, the fact that I had called the local Home Depot to say how much is the tube of sealant that I'm going to use to do that and all of the other materials. It's infinitely better than that person's guess about what it's going to cost in this area. Infinitely better. And Thankfully, we won that trial. So estimate details. We've got the. I'm not. You know what? This is too much detail for you today. These are interesting details to an estimating nerd, but most of you aren't estimating nerds. So the point is that it's, you know, you get into literally what are the guys using? You know, what people are we going to use on site, and how much do they cost to be there, and what are they going to install, and how long is it going to take them to install? So quantity takeoff, I explained this before, that we're literally figuring out how much material, how much physical space is there that we're installing or working in. You know, so, you know, if my room here is, you know, say if it was 20 feet by 10 feet, then that's a 200 square foot room. You know, I'm probably in a 250 square foot room right now. And so that's the amount of flooring and ceiling that I'm going to have to install, right? And we have to think about sometimes the material, if the material comes in a format, you know, if I was going to use vinyl flooring that came in rolls that were 10 feet wide, by whatever, 60 feet long, but I've got a room that's 12 feet wide by 20 feet long. You know, how am I going to do the seams? What am I going to do there? Do I want a 2-foot strip, or do I want to cut it down the middle and use more material? You know, you got to figure it out. Ultimately, you know, you can't just say, you know, when you say, you know, that's $1 a foot. Well, that's $1 a foot for how many square feet? How about if you're going to just do 1 square foot? Well, it's, you know, you can't do 1 square foot of anything for $1, right? You can't drive out to the site for $1. So you got to be careful about using quantities. And it depends. If you're doing 1 square foot or if you're doing 100,000 square feet, the cost per square foot is profoundly different. They have no connection to one another. So be careful with square foot prices. It's you know, it's powerful. You can do a quick estimate that way, but it's also, you can be very dangerous. So commonly used quantities. I'm not going to go through each of these: square feet, lineal feet, cubic yard, etc. So you know, estimate the cost of this project. We were going, you know, if we had all day, we would literally do a detailed construction cost estimate. We don't want to do that. Detailed and bid ready, trial ready estimates. So detailed estimating, we're just refining the estimate. We're making many passes over and over and over again. And so again, we're just, you know, this worksheet, by the way, is in the backup materials if you're interested in it. So we're doing level 4 and 5, and we're just getting very, very detailed about who's doing what. We're building this project on paper. We're planning it on paper before we go out into the field. And that's the way, you know, again, the better the construction company, the more disciplined they are about this process, the less often they get sued, the more often they make a lot of money. This is, you know, these, you know, the companies that build the most beautiful skyscrapers literally have done this. They do this process day in and day out. They have, you know, I have friends who have estimating departments that are bigger than my company. And they do this day in and day out. And if they get that project, you know, and if they spend, you know, 6 weeks, if the whole estimating department spends 6 weeks, and this is no joke, I'm telling you a real story, the whole estimating department spends 6 weeks estimating a $100 million project, and they don't get the project, they are not sad. Because they know when they don't get the project, you know, if they don't get it by $1, then they're very sad. But if they don't get it by $4 million, this is a real story. They don't get it by $4 million, they know that other company is doing that project for free. Right? They know. It's like, yeah, they're going to lose money on that project because we know better than them. They just gave that work away. Right? So, so, you know, at this level, you should know exactly what your costs are and how long you're going to take to do it and who's doing it. All right? I mean, a real, you know, great construction company is going to know which superintendent is going to do that work. So, and again, we're doing those same 10 steps over and over. So remember, document all your assumptions somewhere. Make plan sheet and detail references into the estimate detail sheets. Again, these are details that are, you know, for use by, you know, our company internally. What are the actual things you're going to do? And document your assumptions and make many passes and scrutinize all the assumptions and document them somewhere. You know, somewhere very logical. It's either in the estimate backup materials that are organized the same way the estimate are, or it's literally typed in to the estimate detail sheets. So, and then we're a peer review kind of company, so we pass these things around and, beat each other up, first in the office before we have to go out and get beat up by somebody else, right? Much less indignity to get beat up by the guy who sits next to you in the office than by a big bad attorney. All right, so this is that same project I told you about before, the hotel. It's on the Oregon coast. So we had, and then there's the other project, a multifamily project. So we in the estimate backup materials for section 5. See how am I doing on time? Doing good on time. For section 5. So those estimates, I can tell you, we came remarkably close to our estimates. Our detailed estimates were remarkably close, and we didn't. People can do fun with numbers. I know how to do fun with numbers, but I don't. I would much prefer to operate with unwavering professional integrity. And sometimes our order magnitude estimates are very, very, very close, within 1%. But usually, they're somewhere between 10 and 50%, away. So ultimately, doing an estimate analysis. So you got to, if you're going to analyze 3 construction cost estimates and compare them to each other, you got to organize them the same way so you can break them down. A basic level of estimate analysis is Bob says it's 100 grand, and Steve says it's 200 grand, and Ed says it's 300 grand. And so obviously we like Bob's numbers better than Ed's numbers, but we don't know at this point, until we start breaking it down a little bit, we don't know who's right. Because they all could be wrong. Maybe it's 500,000. Just because you get a low number from somebody who technically is qualified to do the work doesn't mean they're right. Okay? And moving into a construction project with a wrong number is dangerous no matter what. So estimate summary. So here's the estimate summary sheet, and then here. So I have this estimate summary. Oops. I have an estimate summary where I got broken down. This is only 4 levels of breakdown. In this case, I had this very this big giant estimate that was $4 million. So this was a litigation. So, and we do, by the way, we do this exact same matrix for construction projects. When we're operating as an owner's representative or a construction manager, we will do the estimate breakdown. We will have asked for bids in a certain way, and we just literally put them in a column. So, contractor A says it's $4.4 million, and contractor B, in this case, it was a litigation, so the plaintiff's estimate was $4.4 million. And our estimate of that plaintiff's same cost was $3.3 million or something like that. And then the defense scope of work was only $500,000, right? So that's a pretty, you guys, everybody who does litigation knows if the numbers come out at that wide a variation. So estimate analysis, keep asking, how do you know? Work backward. From the grand total into the subtotals, all the way back to the cost of workmen, equipment, materials they install. There is no special magic to this. It's not even a technical exercise. So if you're a lawyer or you're a property manager, you can absolutely figure out, if somebody's estimate is a good one. Why? How do you know? How much is that? How much is that? You can just keep asking. Why? Errors in estimates is more common than not. I don't have time to go into these details because we're only 1 minute from done. All right, burden. We could talk about this forever. I, have funny pictures about burden, obviously. Xactimate is a pricing tool. It's not an estimating tool. It's a perfectly good tool. It's just not something that a professional estimator would use, given his druthers, to create a detailed estimate for a large project. So more case study backup materials. They're in the backup materials. The conclusion, estimating is a skill and a profession, and estimators who've been certified are reliable. It's not necessarily better than people who haven't, but you can, if an estimator has been certified by the American Society of Professional Estimators, then that estimator can estimate. And we've got a bunch of great backup materials, levels of estimating, comparison of estimates. The objective here was we want you to understand the fundamentals of estimating. And the fundamentals really are build the project on paper before you go into the field. And orientation to the estimate components. I hope I did that to your so that you understand. We have this process that's 5 levels and 10 steps. And introduction to the analysis. I had to shortcut that a little bit, but I hope you at least understand that you first have to structure the estimates in the same way and then compare them one by one. And you know what the program outline is.